She's 7 months pregnant, pushing a mop across marble floors at 5 in the morning. He built the building she's cleaning. He also used to be her husband. When he steps off that elevator and sees her, he doesn't pull her aside. He doesn't lower his voice. He turns to his assistant and has her reassigned, like she's a scheduling problem, like she's nothing. What he doesn't know is what's in her coat pocket. 11 pages, drawn by hand. A design so precise, so quietly extraordinary that the most powerful man in that boardroom is about to ask her, not him, one single question. She lost everything because of him. What she built in secret is about to cost him the same. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me, are you watching this in the middle of the night, or did this story find you first thing this morning? Either way, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. The marble floors of Hargrove Capital Partners cost more than Elena Vasquez made in a month. She knew because she had looked it up once, during a slow hour on a Tuesday, standing in the lobby with her mop and nothing but time. Calicotta marble, imported, $72 per square foot. She pushed her bucket across it at 4:47 in the morning, her rubber soles making no sound at all, her body moving through the kind of silence that only exists before a city wakes up. 7 months pregnant, her lower back had been talking to her since 3 a.m. She ignored it the way she ignored most things now, steadily, without drama. She wrung the mop, pushed it forward, wrung it again. The motion was efficient, unhurried. She had learned to clean the way she used to design, with patience, with attention to what others overlooked. The lobby was grand in that particular way that powerful buildings are grand. Glass that started at the floor and ended at the sky. A reception desk that nobody sat at until 8. The name Hargrove Capital Partners spelled out in brushed steel above the elevator bank, letters 6 inches tall. Elena had looked at those letters every morning for 6 months and felt nothing in particular. She was working the far corner near the revolving door when she heard the elevator chime. He stepped out 40 minutes before anyone else ever did. Dark coat, no tie yet, moving the way men move when a building already belongs to them. He was reading something on his phone, and then he wasn't. He had looked up. He had seen her. The phone lowered. Elena felt the recognition pass through the room like a pressure change. The air shifted. She finished the stroke she was already making with the mop and straightened. Marcus Hargrove stood 12 feet away and stared at her. His personal assistant came through the revolving door behind him, stamping cold from her shoes, already talking. 2 junior staff followed, and then another. 6 people total in the time it took Elena to set her weight evenly on both feet. Marcus didn't pull her aside. He didn't lower his voice. He turned slightly toward his assistant, but not so far that the words were private, and said clearly in the echoing marble silence of the lobby, "Reassign her floor. I don't want distractions during board week." He didn't say her name. He was already looking back at his phone. Elena nodded once. She turned back to the section she'd been cleaning. She finished it. The same careful strokes, the same methodical overlap. And then she collected her bucket and her supplies and walked to the service elevator without hurrying. She pressed the button. The doors opened. She stepped inside. The lobby disappeared behind her as the doors closed. She stood alone in the yellow light of the elevator and did not make a sound. The service elevator was slow. Elena had timed it once, 22 seconds from the lobby to the supply floor, long enough to be useful. She leaned against the back wall and let her eyes close, just for a moment, one hand resting on the curve of her belly. The fluorescent light above her buzzed at a frequency that should have been annoying. She barely noticed anymore. She had been a landscape architect for 9 years. She had owned her own firm, Vasquez Design, 6 employees, a corner office in Lincoln Park with a window that faced south, so the light was good all winter. She had won a regional design award in 2019. The Chicago Southland Builders Association had given her a small glass trophy and a photograph and written her name in their newsletter. She still had the newsletter somewhere in a box. 8 years married to Marcus. 8 years believing the finances were stable, believing they were building something together. She had found out differently in the worst possible way. Not through a conversation, not through honesty, but through a letter from a creditor. Then another letter. Then a call from her business bank, then a call from her attorney, and then the terrible and complete understanding of what he had done. He had leveraged their shared assets to fund his next venture. He had done it quietly over 2 years, while she sat across from him at dinner and talked about client projects and spring planting schedules and whether they should repaint the kitchen. The firm went first, then the house. Then the professional reputation, which is a quieter loss but no less total. The divorce was final 14 months ago. Daniel had been kind. That was the truest thing she could say about him. He was a genuinely kind man, the kind that doesn't perform itself, that just exists in the way someone hands you a coffee or remembers you mentioned being tired. He died in a car accident 4 months ago, on a Wednesday afternoon, on a street neither of them had ever thought about before. Elena had been 23 weeks pregnant. She was entirely alone now, structurally alone, the way a building is alone when the frame is the only thing left. She cleaned floors at 4 a.m. because it banked enough by March to cover the birth costs and 2 months of unpaid leave. She had run the numbers 11 times. The elevator shuddered to a stop. She opened her eyes, collected her bucket, and stepped out into the supply corridor. Under the fluorescent hum, she reached into the front pocket of her smock and pulled out a small notebook. The cover was worn at the corners, the spine soft from use. She opened it to the current page. A sketch, half finished. Pedestrian paths. A sight line toward the south. She looked at it for 4 seconds, turned to a clean page, and made 2 quick marks she had been thinking about since the bus. Then she tucked it back into her pocket, loaded her cart, and headed for the next floor. Steady, unhurried, unseen. Sylvia Okafor had been walking the building alone every Thursday morning for 11 years. She arrived at 5:10, took the main elevator to the top floor, and worked her way down, not inspecting exactly, but moving through the space in the way she moved through any document that mattered. She paid attention to what the building was actually doing as opposed to what it was supposed to be doing. She had found 2 plumbing failures this way, one structural concern in the east stairwell, and, over the years, a fairly complete picture of how the company actually operated when nobody senior was watching. The ESG portfolio she chaired was built on the same principle. You did not learn what a company valued by reading its values statement. You walked the building at 5 a.m. She was on the mezzanine level, both hands loose on the railing, looking down at the lobby below, when she noticed the woman with the mop. Sylvia had seen Elena before. A peripheral awareness, a figure moving through the lobby during her Thursday walks. But this morning she paused. Something had made her pause, though she couldn't have said precisely what. Elena was working the far section of the lobby floor, her movements unhurried, her back to the mezzanine. Then she stopped, completely stopped, mid-stroke, and reached into her smock pocket. She pulled out something small, a notebook, and opened it. Her other hand found a pen without looking. She stood very still for a moment, her eyes moving in the focused way that people move their eyes when they are solving something, not transcribing it. Then she wrote or drew. From the mezzanine, Sylvia couldn't tell which, made several quick marks, and tucked the notebook back into her pocket. She picked up the mop and resumed. The whole sequence had taken under 30 seconds. Sylvia stood at the railing a moment longer. 28 years in institutional finance had given her a particular skill. She could recognize the difference between someone going through the motions and someone who was, despite appearances, completely present. The woman below her was completely present. Whatever was in that notebook, it was not a grocery list. Now, what are you drawing, I wonder? She said it quietly to no one, and filed the thought the way she filed most things, precisely, and somewhere she would be able to find it again. She pushed off from the railing and continued down the hall. 3 floors below, Elena wrung her mop and moved to the next section, her back to the mezzanine, entirely unaware that anyone had watched. The lobby was empty again. The silence settled back into place like water after a stone. 2 days later, Marcus made a phone call that Elena would not know about until it was already done. Marcus made the call on a Tuesday morning from his office, with the door closed. He didn't use his personal line. He called Apex Facilities Management's client services number, the one printed on the vendor contract in the building operations file, a number that any senior executive might call for any routine reason. He gave his name and his title and asked to be connected to client services. He was on hold for less than a minute. He told the representative that he needed to request a permanent reassignment, one of the cleaning staff on the Hargrove account, a conflict of interest. He kept it vague, and vague was enough. The representative said she understood. She said she'd escalate it to the account supervisor. Marcus thanked her and ended the call and went back to his board presentation. Glenn, the Apex account supervisor, processed it that afternoon without a single question. He called Elena at 4:18 p.m. She was on the bus home, her feet aching, the notebook open on her knee. Glenn explained the situation in the careful, neutral tone of a man delivering news he did not make. Client request. Conflict of interest. He used Marcus's exact phrase without knowing it. She could keep her position with Apex, but she would be transferring immediately to a hospital complex on the south side. Different account. Longer commute. The floor premium she'd been earning at Hargrove would not carry over. Elena listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked one question. Is there any recourse? A pause. No, Glenn said. I'm sorry. Okay, she said. Thank you for letting me know. She hung up and closed the notebook. Outside the bus window, Chicago moved past in the flat gray light of November. Storefronts, a laundromat, a dollar store with a paper sign taped to the glass. She sat with the phone in her lap and looked at none of it. She understood exactly what had happened. Marcus had not confronted her. He had not argued or threatened or involved himself in any way that left a mark. He had made one quiet phone call from behind a closed door and moved her like a piece on a board. No fingerprints, no conversation, nothing she could point to or dispute. She had lost her firm the same way, not in a fight she could see coming, but through a long series of quiet decisions made by someone she trusted, from a distance, in rooms she wasn't in. She sat very still for 3 more stops. Then she opened the notebook again, found her page, and picked up where she had left off. The south light angle, the drainage grate along the eastern edge. Her hand was steady. She still had the job. She would learn the new building. She would take the longer bus. She would figure out what came next, the same way she had figured out everything else. One careful line at a time. The hospital complex on the south side was older than Hargrove Capital by 40 years and showed it in every surface. The floors were linoleum, not marble. The ceilings were drop tile. The cleaning carts were heavier, and the supply closets were poorly organized, and the bus ride was 53 minutes each way, which Elena knew because she timed it on her first morning. Derek was the Apex site manager. He was 44, with the particular energy of a man who had been passed over for something and hadn't stopped thinking about it. He resented Elena's reassignment onto his rotation. She could see it in the way he handed her the schedule on her first day, not quite meeting her eyes, his jaw set. The problem started small. Wrong scheduling. She arrived for a shift that had been changed without notice, then was marked late. A denied elevator key that every other cleaner on the floor had been issued. A uniform write-up for a smock that met every standard in the Apex employee manual, which she had read twice. Elena came home after the write-up and sat at her kitchen table and wrote everything down. Date, time, what was said, who was present. She opened a new section of her notebook. Not the design notebook, a different one, a plain spiral pad she bought at the pharmacy on the corner. She started at the beginning and wrote it all in order, in plain language, because she had learned in the last 2 years that the only documentation that matters is the kind you made before you needed it. She filed a formal complaint with Apex HR. HR acknowledged receipt. Nothing changed. She filed again. She looked up the Workers' Rights Clinic on the city's website, on her phone, on the bus home. She had an appointment within the week. The intake counselor was a young woman named Tess who listened carefully and told Elena plainly what she had. A documentable pattern of targeted obstruction, a paper trail that was already stronger than most cases they saw. They would help her build the formal submission. Elena thanked her and took the bus home. She did not tell anyone at work. She did not change her tone with Derek. She did not become smaller or louder or anything other than exactly what she had always been. On her lunch breaks, she ate in the stairwell by the east exit, quieter than the break room, and she sketched. The South Shore lot was starting to take shape across several pages now. The pedestrian path curved slightly to the east to catch afternoon light. She added a retaining element along the north edge, wrote a note in the margin, wheelchair clearance. Check standard. She took the bus home that evening with the complaint log in her bag and the notebook open on her lap. The design kept growing, one careful line at a time. Something was coming. She could feel it. The way you feel a season turning before the temperature actually drops. She just didn't know yet what form it would take. Priya called on a Sunday evening, the way she had been calling every few weeks since Daniel died. Warm and unhurried, not asking Elena how she was holding up in the way that people ask when they don't want a real answer. Priya asked real questions. She listened to the real answers. She had been Elena's colleague for 4 years at Vasquez Design, and she was one of the few people from that life who had stayed. They talked for a while about small things. Then Priya mentioned the South Shore Community Land Trust, a half-acre vacant lot, a community board of elderly homeowners who had been fighting a developer for 2 years over the right to determine what happened to it. The land trust needed a design consultation. Volunteer work, no pay, but real work, real design. Someone was supposed to come in and help them put together a proposal strong enough to counter what the developer had filed. That someone had just backed out. Priya said she thought of Elena immediately. Elena said yes before Priya finished the sentence. The first meeting was on a Thursday evening in the back room of a community center that smelled like old coffee and floor wax. 6 people around a folding table. Elena was the youngest person in the room by 20 years. She brought her notebook and a pen and said almost nothing for the first 30 minutes. Margaret was the board chair. 74 years old, with the bearing of a woman who had learned a long time ago that waiting for someone else to fix things was not a strategy. She laid out the situation without drama. The lot had been vacant for 11 years. The developer wanted to put up a parking structure, and the community wanted something that served the people who actually lived there. She looked at Elena steadily. "We don't need something fancy," Margaret said. "We just need something that says we're still here." Elena wrote that down, not as a note, as a brief. She asked questions for the next hour. Sun angles, foot traffic patterns, what the neighbors across the street had said, what the elderly residents on the east side needed most, whether anyone had drainage issues in wet weather. She listened more than she spoke, and she wrote everything down. After the meeting, she walked the lot alone. It was dark and cold, the ground hard, a chain-link fence running the perimeter. She stood in the middle of it with her hands in her coat pockets and turned in a slow circle. The city spread in every direction. The lot was mostly flat. There was a slight grade toward the south, a mature tree on the northwest corner that she hadn't been told about. She stood there long enough that her feet went numb. She already knew what it could become. The Raymond Cole file was 43 pages. Marcus had read it 3 times. Sylvia had read it once and understood it better. They sat across from each other in the 22nd floor conference room 3 weeks after the lobby incident. The file opened between them, the city gray and low outside the glass. Raymond Cole was 67 years old. Reclusive. He had made his money in infrastructure, bridges, tunnels, water systems, and spent the last 15 years giving most of it away. $40 million was what he was considering committing to Hargrove's Urban Development Fund. It was the largest single commitment in the firm's history. Marcus wanted it badly. Sylvia could see it in the way he held his pen. Raymond's condition for committing was a site evaluation, a full day at Hargrove Capital, touring the building, meeting the team, asking whatever questions he wanted. He was known for asking unexpected ones. He had walked away from 2 other firms in the past 4 years. Both times, the firms found out afterward what they'd done wrong. Neither had seen it coming. His personal obsession was what he called the design of dignity. He believed, with the quiet certainty of someone who had thought about nothing else for a decade, that the way shared spaces were built determined whether the people inside them felt human. He had been given parking structures when he asked for plazas. He had been given glass lobbies when he asked for gardens. He had stopped trusting pitch decks entirely. Sylvia waited for the right moment and then said, casually, that they should add a worker voice component to the building tour, ESG documentation, show Raymond how the firm actually operated at every level, not just the executive floor. Marcus agreed without looking up from the file. He was already thinking about the closing remarks. He did not register what she was setting in motion. That same week at the hospital complex on the south side, Derek filed a second write-up against Elena. This one was different. The first had been petty enough to dismiss. This one cited a pattern of non-compliance, used formal language, and checked the box that triggered a mandatory review process. It was the kind of write-up that could end a position. Elena read it, standing at the supply closet, holding the single sheet of paper with both hands. She had been waiting for him to escalate. She was ready. Her complaint log was 22 entries long. The Workers' Rights Clinic had already reviewed it and confirmed the documentation was strong. Stronger, Tess had said, than most submissions they filed. Elena put the write-up in her bag beside the log, tied her smock, and went back to work. But that evening, reading the formal language a second time at her kitchen table, she let herself feel the full weight of it. The exhaustion, the relentlessness, the specific cruelty of being punished for surviving. She was so tired, and someone at Hargrove Capital had just made a phone call that would change everything, though Elena had no way of knowing it yet. Sylvia called Apex's client services director on a Tuesday evening from her office after most of the building had cleared out. It was a routine call, or it was meant to be. She was arranging the logistics for Elena's one-day reassignment back to Hargrove for Raymond's tour, a worker representative for ESG documentation purposes. Simple enough. The director, a woman named Carol, was professional and cooperative, and slightly uncomfortable in a way that Sylvia recognized immediately. Sylvia had spent 28 years learning to read the particular discomfort of people who knew something they weren't sure they should say. She asked directly if there was anything she should know about the account. Carol mentioned, carefully, that the worker she was planning to reassign had an active write-up situation on file, a second write-up, a formal review process underway. Sylvia asked for the name, Elena Vasquez. After the call ended, Sylvia sat very still for a moment. Then she opened her laptop and typed the name into a search field she rarely used, the Apex client directory, cross-referenced with public records. She was looking for nothing in particular. That was always when she found things. What came back stopped her cold. A 2019 Regional Design Award citation from the Chicago Southland Builders Association. A dissolved LLC, Vasquez Design, registered 2013, dissolved 2022. A 7-year-old trade profile in a landscape architecture journal with a photograph. Elena at a job site, younger in a hard hat, squinting slightly into the light, smiling. Sylvia sat with it for a long time. She sat with it for 2 days, actually. She did not act immediately. She had learned that the most consequential decisions deserved more than one night. Meanwhile, Elena filed her formal harassment documentation through the Workers' Rights Clinic. Tess submitted it through the proper channels. Elena's log, her evidence, her own process, already moving before anyone else had touched it. Elena had not waited. She had never waited. On a cold Saturday morning, she took 2 buses to the South Shore lot and walked it alone. She had 4 surveyor's flags in her bag, the small orange kind, on thin wire stakes that she had bought herself at a hardware store on Thursday. She paced the perimeter once, then she drove each flag into the frozen ground at the four corners of her design. Her coat wouldn't button anymore. Her belly pressed against the zipper, and she left it open, the cold coming through her sweater, her breath visible in the air. She planted the last flag, stepped back, and looked at the shape she had made. 4 orange flags in a half-acre lot on a gray Chicago morning. It was enough. It was, quietly, beautiful. She said nothing out loud, but she thought. It was enough to know it was right, even if no one else ever saw it. That evening, Sylvia called Carol back and arranged the reassignment. One day, ESG documentation. No further explanation given. Hargrove Capital Partners was polished to a standard it didn't maintain on ordinary days. The lobby had been detailed overnight. The marble floors buffed to a high shine, the reception desk cleared of everything except a single arrangement of white flowers. The elevator doors had been wiped clean of fingerprints. The building smelled faintly of something expensive and neutral. Marcus had overseen the preparations personally. Elena arrived at 6:15 a.m. and had no idea why she was there. Her reassignment notice had come through Apex 2 days earlier. 1 day return to the Hargrove account, no explanation given beyond ESG documentation. She had put on her uniform, taken the familiar bus route, and walked through the service entrance the way she always had. The lobby looked different this morning, and she took note of it the way she took note of everything, steadily, without comment. She was on the mezzanine level with her cart when the executive elevator opened at 7:40. Marcus stepped out first. He crossed the lobby toward the reception desk, and then he saw her, above him, through the mezzanine glass. His jaw tightened. A muscle moved near his eye. He looked away. Sylvia was already in the lobby, standing near the main entrance, her coat folded over her arm. She had watched Marcus register Elena's presence from across the room. She had seen the jaw. She had seen the look away. She filed it the way she filed everything. Raymond Cole arrived at 8 o'clock exactly. He was quieter in person than his file suggested. A compact man in a plain dark coat, no entourage, no assistant. He shook hands with Marcus and Sylvia and asked, before anyone had said a word about the agenda, whether the coffee in the hospitality suite was from the building's regular vendor or brought in for the occasion. Marcus blinked. Sylvia said it was the regular vendor. Raymond nodded, satisfied by something the question had told him. The tour began with Sylvia leading. They moved through the lobby level first, then the lower conference facilities, then up through the operations corridor. Raymond asked small questions at unexpected moments, about the ventilation system, about the cleaning schedule, about how maintenance requests were logged and who reviewed them. Marcus answered smoothly, confidently, in the practiced cadence of a man who had closed difficult deals before. But Raymond wasn't looking at Marcus when he asked the questions. He was looking at the building. As the group turned toward the mezzanine staircase, Raymond paused in the middle of the lobby and looked up at the floors above him. The marble, the light, the long, clean lines of a building maintained with obvious care. "Beautiful building," he said quietly, to no one in particular. Then he looked at Sylvia. "Who keeps it this way?" "Let's go up," Sylvia said. The group moved toward the mezzanine. Elena looked up from her work. Her eyes met Raymond's as he reached the top of the stairs. He stopped. Raymond Cole had the unhurried manner of a man who had learned that most important things revealed themselves if you gave them enough silence. He introduced himself to Elena simply, first name, no title, and asked how long she had been maintaining the building. 6 months at Hargrove, she told him. He nodded. He asked about the cleaning schedule, the products used on the marble, whether the mezzanine presented any particular challenges in winter when foot traffic was heavier. Elena answered each question directly, without performance, the way she answered every question. She knew the building. She knew her work. She did not pretend otherwise, and she did not minimize it. Marcus stood slightly behind Raymond. His face was composed. His hands were not. Then Raymond's eyes dropped to her smock pocket. The corner of the notebook was visible, just the worn edge of the cover, barely an inch of it. He looked at it, the way he had looked at the lobby floor, quietly, with attention. "What's that?" he asked. A pause. Elena reached into her pocket and took out the notebook. She held it for one moment. Then she opened it to the South Shore pages and handed it to him. Raymond Cole took it with both hands. He didn't flip through it quickly. He turned each page slowly, studying it the way an architect studies a plan. Not for what it said, but for what the person drawing it understood. The pedestrian paths curved to follow the grade of the land. The raised garden beds at wheelchair height, annotated in Elena's small, precise handwriting. The central gathering pavilion, oriented to capture southern light in the dead of winter, when light on the south side of Chicago was the most valuable thing a public space could offer. The drainage retention system, landscaped into a shallow meadow basin rather than left as exposed concrete. 11 pages of thinking, 11 pages of work done in supply closets and empty stairwells, and on bus seats at the end of long shifts. Raymond turned the last page. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked up at Elena. Marcus had gone the color of old concrete. "If you had the resources," Raymond said, "what would you build?" Elena didn't hesitate. She'd been ready to answer this question for 3 years, had been rehearsing it, in a sense, every time she opened that notebook. She described the South Shore lot completely, the community board's vision, Margaret's brief, the specific needs of elderly residents who had been waiting 11 years for something that said they were still there. She talked about the tree on the northwest corner that nobody else had noticed. She talked about the drainage problem that the developer's plan ignored entirely. She talked about what dignity looked like when it was built into the ground itself, into the path width, into the height of a garden bed. She spoke for 4 minutes. No one interrupted her. When she finished, Raymond nodded once. Then Sylvia stepped forward. Sylvia spoke the way she did everything, with precision and without hurry. She addressed the room as a whole, but her posture made clear she was laying a record, not making an argument. She began with Elena's credentials: a master's degree in landscape architecture from the University of Illinois, a firm founded in 2013, Vasquez Design, 6 employees, a reputation built over 9 years of community and commercial projects across the Chicago metro area, the 2019 Regional Design Award from the Chicago Southland Builders Association. She stated each item plainly. She did not editorialize. Then she described the dissolution of the firm, the financial betrayal, the leveraged assets, the divorce. She did not name it as Marcus's doing in those sentences. She simply laid the facts in order and let the room understand the shape of them. Then she named him. She said that the client request to Apex Facilities Management, the one that transferred Elena off the Hargrove account the week of the lobby incident, was traceable. She had the documentation. The request had come from a senior executive at Hargrove Capital. She looked at Marcus steadily when she said it, and she did not look away. Marcus said nothing. His jaw was tight. The color hadn't returned to his face. Sylvia continued. She described the pattern of write-ups at the hospital complex, Derek's escalating obstruction, the false uniform citation, the second write-up serious enough to threaten Elena's position entirely. And then she said something that made the room go very still. She said that Elena had already handled it herself, her own written log, her own formal complaint filings, her own consultation with a workers' rights clinic, her own harassment documentation, submitted through proper channels, already moving toward resolution before anyone else had noticed or intervened. Elena had not waited to be found. She had not waited to be rescued. She had built her own case with the same care and precision she brought to every other thing she built. Sylvia turned to Marcus for the first time directly. "You saw a pregnant woman with a mop," she said, "and made a decision about what she was worth. You were wrong about all of it." The room held the words. Elena stood very still. 2 things arrived at once, like 2 currents meeting in the same water. She had been seen. Sylvia had noticed her in November and had been watching ever since, quietly the way someone watches something they intend to protect, and she had also, at the same time in the same months, been protecting herself. Both things were true. She had not needed saving. She had simply needed someone to finally look. Raymond Cole turned away from Marcus and extended his hand to Elena. Not to Marcus, to Elena. "Thank you," he said, "for the notebook." The $40 million was no longer going to Hargrove Capital. The consequences arrived in sequence, as consequences do when the evidence is clean and the witness is credible. Raymond's formal withdrawal letter reached the Hargrove Capital Board 8 days after the tour. It was 2 paragraphs. The cited reason was misalignment of values around human capital and community design. It named nothing, and everyone who read it understood exactly what it meant. Within the week, it had been reported in 2 financial trade publications. The coverage was brief and factual and permanent in the way that brief factual coverage always is. The board met on a Tuesday. Sylvia was present. Marcus was present. The board chair, a measured woman named Patricia, who had been with the firm for 16 years, looked at Marcus across the table and said, "This isn't about one decision, Marcus. It's about what that decision revealed." The vote was 5-2. Marcus was asked to step back from day-to-day leadership pending a governance review. He was given 30 days. That evening, he rode the elevator to the 22nd floor alone. His office was dark. He didn't turn on the lights. He stood at the window and looked out at Chicago spread below him. The grid of it, the river, the bridges he had always taken for granted because they had always simply been there, holding things together. His phone was on the table behind him, face down. He didn't pick it up. He stood there for a long time. The narration does not follow him further. Some losses are simply what they are. The city below him did not change because he was watching it. The building behind him continued to function. The floors continued to be cleaned. The work continued as it always had, largely invisible to the people who benefited most from it. At Apex Facilities Management, the result of Elena's formal harassment submission, her log, her evidence, her process, moved through the proper channels and arrived at its proper conclusion. Derek was terminated. The letter of termination cited a documented pattern of targeted obstruction against a subordinate employee. Elena was not copied on the letter. She found out through a brief call from Tess at the Workers' Rights Clinic, who said simply that it was done. Glenn called Elena 2 days after that. He issued a formal written apology, not a form letter, an actual paragraph that used her name and acknowledged specifically what had happened. Elena read it once, thanked him, and filed it with the rest of her documentation. She did not feel triumphant. She felt something quieter than that. The particular settling that comes when the ground underneath you finally stops moving. She was 34 years old, 8 months pregnant, and employed. Her case was closed. Her design was staked in the South Shore lot with 4 orange flags. She didn't know yet what was coming, but something was. 6 weeks later, Raymond Cole's assistant called and asked if she was available to meet. The meeting was in a small conference room on the 14th floor of a building on Michigan Avenue. Nothing like the Hargrove lobby, nothing staged or polished for impression. A round table, 4 chairs, afternoon light coming in, flat and gray through the windows. Raymond was already seated when Elena arrived. Sylvia was beside him. There was a folder on the table and a glass of water at Elena's place. Raymond stood when she came in. He waited until she was seated before he sat back down. He slid the folder across the table and asked her to open it. She did. The first page said, "The Vasquez Design Fellowship." Elena read the words twice. Her chest tightened. She kept her face still and kept reading. The fellowship would be housed within Raymond's Family Foundation. Total funding, $2.8 million committed over 5 years, dedicated to landscape architecture work in under-resourced communities, specifically for designers whose careers had been interrupted by economic displacement, not designers who had given up, designers who had been pushed out and kept going anyway. Elena was named creative director. The salary was $94,000 per year, full benefits, a 3-year funded design studio in the South Shore neighborhood. The neighborhood she was already serving had already walked in the dark, had already staked with orange flags on a frozen Saturday morning when no one was watching. She looked up. Raymond said, "We're not giving you an opportunity. We're returning what was always yours." She couldn't speak for a moment. She didn't try to. Sylvia told her the rest. Priya had been named to the fellowship's advisory board, formally acknowledged, in writing, as the person whose Sunday evening phone call had started the chain that led to this room. Elena thought about Priya's voice on the phone that night, warm and unhurried, saying, "I thought of you immediately." The smallest kindnesses had the longest reach. Margaret and the South Shore Community Board had been notified that morning. The half-acre lot, the one Elena had walked alone in the cold, the one she had measured with her eyes and staked with her own hands, would be the fellowship's inaugural project, the first thing built under the Vasquez name. Elena pressed her hand flat against the table. She needed the solidity of it. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday in March, 4 days before her due date, Inez Daniela was born, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, healthy, loud in the first minutes, and then calm, her dark eyes open, already looking. Priya was in the waiting room. She had been there since 2 in the morning, and she stayed until she was allowed in. Flowers arrived from Sylvia that evening, white, simple, no card needed. Elena held her daughter in the quiet of the hospital room, the fellowship documents folded in her bag, the South Shore plans already submitted for permitting. Inez, for no reason except that it was beautiful. Daniela, because it was the only thing she could still give him. 18 months after the lobby, the South Shore lot was finished. Elena arrived on a bright winter morning with Inez in a carrier against her chest, the baby's small weight familiar and warm, her face tucked in against Elena's collarbone. The sky was pale blue and sharp, and the light came in low from the south the way it does in January, angled and clean, finding every surface it could reach. It found the pavilion first. The central gathering structure stood exactly as Elena had drawn it in the notebook. Oriented due south, open on the winter side, the roof line sloped to catch the low January sun and hold it. The light moved across the interior the way she had calculated it would, spreading slowly across the concrete floor like something being poured. She had drawn that light a dozen times in supply closets and bus seats and lunch breaks and empty stairwells. She had believed in it without ever having seen it. Now she saw it. She stood at the pavilion entrance and did not move for a long moment. Inez slept against her chest, unbothered by the cold. Margaret arrived with 3 other community board members at 9 o'clock, bundled and purposeful. She carried a small garden trowel and a flat of winter kale, seedlings she had grown herself on her kitchen windowsill. She walked the paths first, the pedestrian paths that curved east to follow the land's own grade, wide enough for 2 wheelchairs side by side, smooth and unhurried. She ran one hand along the edge of the raised garden bed nearest the entrance, built to exactly the right height, exactly as requested. Then she knelt down at the first bed and planted. The other board members planted beside her, and the 4 of them worked in the quiet, companionable way of people who had been fighting for something together long enough that they no longer needed to talk about it. Sylvia arrived a few minutes later. She fell into step beside Elena on the path without announcing herself, without preamble. They walked together toward the drainage basin, landscaped now into a shallow meadow of native grasses, beautiful in winter, the dry seed heads catching the light. No words passed between them, none were needed. Sylvia had seen Elena before. Elena knew she was seen, and that debt had long since been repaid in full, and now they were simply 2 women walking a finished thing together in the cold. The Vasquez Design Fellowship had already received 47 applications. Displaced designers from 6 cities, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Baltimore, St. Louis, Philadelphia, had read the fellowship's founding statement and recognized themselves in it and applied. 47 people who had kept going when the ground gave way. 47 notebooks in one form or another. Elena stopped at the pavilion. The light found it, exactly as she had designed. Inez slept against her chest. She had been building this her whole life. She just needed someone to finally see the blueprint. If you know someone whose worth the world completely underestimated, tell us about them in the comments. Subscribe and stay for the next story.